Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1874. Wind carved across the high plains as the stagecoach doors slammed shut behind Savannah Pierce and changed the direction of her life forever. The mountain air was thin and sharp, and so was the look the escort gave her. Dark eyes, a scar along his jaw, and not a trace of warmth in his voice when he said, "You Savannah Pierce?" "I am," she answered, her chin high despite her raw nerves. "Name's Jack Jarrett. I am the one they paid to get you to Montana in one piece." He did not offer a handshake. She did not expect one. Savannah gathered her skirts and stepped down onto the dusty road outside the Cheyenne depot. Behind her, the stagecoach rolled away, leaving behind the last familiar place she would ever know. She did not look back. Jack led her to two horses tied to a hitching post just outside the station. "You ride?" Savannah hesitated. "Not well." He gave a nod like that was no surprise. "You will before we pass the bighorns. That wagon trail's no place for a lady on foot." She did not argue. She had no room to. Not after what she had left behind. Her father had sold the last of their land in Missouri to pay her dowry. The man she was promised to some cattlemen in Helena she had never met had wired for her passage and arranged for an escort. It was all meant to be safe. Simple. But nothing about Jack Jarrett felt safe or simple. He moved like someone used to trouble. Worn boots, a Henry rifle tied to his saddle, gray dust in the seams of his coat. He did not explain much as they headed out of Cheyenne. Just told her to keep up, stay quiet, and not trust anyone. By the second night, Savannah had blisters on both heels and her thighs ached from riding, but she did not complain. Jack made camp quick and clean, building a low fire and laying out her bedroll with a precision that told her he had done this 100 times. She sat across from him, chewing slowly at the hard biscuit and dried beef he handed her. "Why do you do this?" she asked. He looked up. "Do what?" "Escort brides west." He shrugged. "Pays well enough. I do not ask questions. I just get people where they are going. You do not like it. I do not like or dislike it. I just do it." She studied him across the firelight. His face was weathered, but not harsh. His hands were large, steady. There was something behind his eyes, tired, maybe, or just closed off. He saw her watching. "You are staring." Savannah looked away quick. "I am just trying to understand the man I will be trusting with my life for the next 4 weeks. He leaned back against his saddle, arms crossed. "Then know this, I will keep you safe. No matter what." It was not said kindly, but it was said like a promise. And that was enough. They rode through thick pine forests and along ridgelines that opened wide to golden valleys. Sometimes they passed other travelers. Sometimes they were alone for days. Jack taught her how to hold the reins better, how to listen for rattlesnakes, how to spot the shape of a mountain lion before it moved. He never talked about himself. But he watched her closely, checked her canteen, kept her on the leeward side of the wind, never let her ride too far behind. One night after a long day of riding, Savannah sat by the fire and rubbed her sore ankles. Jack handed her a tin of salve without saying a word. When she looked up, he was already walking away. The next morning, she found her saddle cinch tightened and her stirrups adjusted. She had not asked. He had just done it. They were 2 weeks in when trouble came. They camped near a bend in the Tongue River, the water running cold and fast. Jack had gone to set traps. Savannah was boiling coffee when she heard the snap of twigs behind her. She turned and saw 2 men. Dirty, thin, one with a shotgun slung low and the other with a knife. "Well now," the one with the shotgun said, grinning. "Look what wandered out here all dressed up." Savannah stepped back. "You need to leave." "We were just about to say the same thing," the other one said, licking his cracked lips. "But you can come with us instead." She reached for Jack's rifle, but he was already there. He moved fast, quiet. One shot dropped the man with the shotgun. The man with the knife turned, but Jack was on him before he could run. He slammed him to the ground, pinned him, and pressed the barrel of his revolver to the man's head. "You breathe wrong," Jack hissed, "and I will end you." Savannah stood frozen, heart pounding, hands shaking. The man whimpered. Jack knocked him out cold and dragged him off, tying him to a tree. When he came back, his jaw was tight. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes." He crouched beside her, checking her arms, her hands. "You are sure?" "I am sure." Jack stood, breathing hard. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then he said, "I should have been closer. I will not make that mistake again. You saved my life." His voice was low. "I will keep doing it if I have to." They broke camp early the next day. Jack never left her alone again, not even to check traps. They slept closer now, the fire between them but his bedroll within reach of hers. He still barely talked, but something had shifted. His eyes lingered longer. His hand brushed hers when he handed her a tin cup, and he did not pull it away too fast. One night, curled up in her blanket under a sky full of stars, Savannah whispered, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to have someone waiting at the end of the road?" Jack was quiet. Then, "I used to. A long time ago." "What happened?" "I stopped believing it was possible." She turned her face toward him. "Maybe it still is." Jack looked at her for a long time, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he said, "Get some sleep. We ride at dawn." But that night, he kept the fire burning longer than usual. And when she woke, his coat was draped over her shoulders. By the third week, the land turned rougher, wide slopes of sage and gravel where wind pushed through the cottonwoods and left them whispering long after it passed. Snow had begun to powder the higher ridges, and the nights came cold and early. Savannah woke one morning to frost webbed across her blanket's edge and a stillness in her chest she couldn't explain. Jack had already gathered the horses, his breath ghosting in the air as he tightened the cinch on her mare. "That ridge line's going to take us 2 days, he said, nodding toward the hills ahead. "We'll camp above the river tonight. No cover, but the water's clean." She nodded, drawing her shawl tighter. Her fingers had stiffened in the cold, and she fumbled with her gloves. Jack paused, then stepped closer and took them from her hands, easing them on without a word. His touch was careful, not rushed or self-conscious, just steady. She didn't look at his face. Didn't need to. They climbed slowly that day, the horses picking their way through shale and dry grass. Mule deer darted between stands of twisted pine, and the sky hung low with slate-colored clouds. They didn't speak much, there was no need, but Savannah noticed the way Jack rode, half turned toward her, eyes always scanning the ridge above. Late afternoon brought them to the bluff he'd mentioned, where the river forked and ran narrow between gray banks. Jack dismounted, hands moving quick and efficient as he gathered dry twigs from beneath a fallen tree. Savannah watched the way he crouched near the fire ring, his coat pulled tight against the wind. She knew he'd taken the upwind side during the climb, letting her ride in the shelter of his back. "You always carry that locket?" he asked, nodding to the chain at her throat. She hesitated, fingers lifting to the small brass oval. "It was my mother's. You look like you favored her. She died when I was 10. I don't remember much, just the way she brushed my hair before supper. Her hands were soft. Everything else feels like fog." Jack didn't answer right away. He lit the fire with a flint and steel, the sparks catching slow. When the flames took, he leaned back on his heels. "I remember my brother's laugh better than his face," he said finally. "He was 2 years older, drowned in the Powder River when we were boys. I still hear it sometimes, when the wind's right." Savannah looked at him then, and something shifted between them, not out of pity, but a shared understanding that neither of them had spoken before. She reached across the space between their bedrolls and handed him a strip of jerky. It was the first time she'd offered him anything. They ate in silence after that, the fire cracking low and the stars beginning to show between the clouds. Jack leaned back against his saddle, arms folded across his chest, but his eyes never drifted far from her. "Why Helena?" he asked after a while. Savannah watched the flame curl around the edge of a stick. "It wasn't my choice. My father made the match. Said the man-owned land had a good herd. That was enough." "Still," Jack said, voice quiet, "you could have refused. And bring shame to the family that raised me?" She shook her head. "In Missouri, a woman's name is all she has. I was raised to do my duty, no matter how far it takes me. Jack didn't answer, but his jaw worked once, tight and slow. He threw another stick on the fire, then stood and walked to check the horses, his boots crunching over the frost-stiff grass. That night, she dreamed of water wide and endless with no banks to anchor it. When she woke, Jack was sitting upright beside the fire, rifle across his knees, his profile lined by the dying embers. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at her, just watching the dark. Savannah sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Do you ever think of settling somewhere?" "Used to," he said. "But I never stayed in one place long enough to see the seasons change." "Why not?" Jack glanced at her then, and for the first time she saw hesitation in him, not fear, but something gentler. "Because I never had a reason to stay." She didn't say anything, just reached over and added a log to the fire, letting the light grow between them. When she lay back down, she didn't turn away. And when Jack finally settled onto his bedroll, it was closer than it had ever been before. The cold still pressed in at the edges, but between them there was warmth enough. The last ridge before the Gallatin Valley rose ahead of them, steep and streaked with snow along the shadowed edges. The wind had gone quiet, but the air held a tension that felt like held breath. Jack guided his horse up the incline first, testing the ground before signaling Savannah onward. She followed without hesitation, her mare sure-footed now, her hands easy on the reins. At the crest, the land opened wide, low hills rolled toward distant buttes, scrub pine scattered like dark ink across the gold and gray. Beyond, the valley stretched toward the mountains that framed Helena's edge, distant but close enough now to feel real. Savannah stared, silent. Jack dismounted, adjusting the saddle blanket where it had shifted. "We'll make the town in 5 days, maybe 4 if weather holds." She nodded, then said, "I thought it would feel better, seeing it." He turned. "And it doesn't?" "It feels like something's closing, not opening." Her voice barely carried. He didn't press her. Instead, he walked to the edge of the ridge and crouched, scanning the valley below. When he spoke again, his tone was different, not guarded, but careful. "There's a trail off the southern rise, less traveled. Could take us around the main pass. Why would we need to avoid the pass? I rode through there last spring. One of the ranch outfits has been pushing out squatters. Sometimes they don't ask questions first." She stepped beside him, glancing at the slope. "Are you worried they'll think I'm one of them?" His jaw worked once. "I don't trust men who make their living by claiming what isn't theirs." Savannah studied him. "You ever done that?" He met her eyes. "No. But I've worked for men who did." The sun dipped lower, setting fire to the tops of the grass. Savannah turned toward the faint path that wound down through the trees. "Let's take your trail." They rode in quiet as dusk settled. Jack found a hollow near a boulder outcropping where the wind broke clean and the ground was dry. He unsaddled the horses while Savannah gathered pine needles and dry moss for kindling. She moved quickly, sleeves pushed up, hands steady. After the fire caught, she sat back, stretching her legs toward the warmth. Jack passed her a strip of salt pork, then settled across from her, his back against a log. "My brother used to say the land doesn't care who you are," he said. "It just wants to know if you'll listen." Savannah tilted her head. "Did you listen to it, back then?" "Tried to. Didn't always get it right." "What changed?" He watched the fire. "Lost too much not to start paying attention." She let that settle a while. The flames snapped, and somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called low. "You said you worked for men who took what wasn't theirs," she said. "Why did you leave?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "One of them put a man in the ground over a fence line. Claimed it was legal. I knew better." "You stopped him." Jack shook his head. "Didn't stop him, but I didn't stay after." Savannah's voice thinned. "The man you left me for in Helena. Do you know him?" "No. But I know the kind of man who wires for a bride and doesn't come to meet her himself." She looked away, her fingers tightening around the tin cup in her lap. "I'm not judging," he added. Just wondering if he sees you at all. She didn't answer. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You said your name was all you had. But that's not true. What else is there? Your will. Your mind. The way you ride now, the way you read the sky. You've learned more in 3 weeks than most do in a year. That's yours. No one gave it to you. Savannah stayed still, but her throat moved as she swallowed. I'm not the same woman who boarded that stage in Cheyenne, she said. No, he agreed. You're stronger. The fire burned low. She reached for another log, but he stopped her with a small shake of his head. Let it go out slow, he said. Heat holds better that way. She wrapped her arms around her knees, gazing into the coals. The quiet stretched long until she said, if I asked you to turn south instead of west, would you? He didn't blink. Is that what you want? I don't know yet. Jack nodded once and lay back, folding his arms beneath his head. Savannah stayed upright, watching him in the glow of the last embers. He wasn't speaking like a man trying to change her mind, just waiting to see what hers would become. And for the first time, she felt like she had the kind of choice that mattered. The snow came midway through the 4th night, quiet and fine, laying a pale hush over the pine needles and the worn trail they followed east of the Missouri Breaks. Jack had known it was coming, the stillness in the air, the way the animals had gone quiet, even the scent of it. He didn't wake Savannah, just added more wood to the fire and sat up beneath his blanket, rifle resting across his thighs. By morning, the horses were dusted white and the sun hung low, dim behind a sky the color of tin. Savannah stepped from her bedroll without a word, blinking slow, her breath curling silver. She moved with care, brushing snow from her saddle, lashing her pack tighter, her jaw set. You warm enough through the night? Jack asked, his voice low. I was. She tugged her gloves snug. You didn't sleep. He didn't pretend. Didn't need to. They rode without speaking for some time, their horses' hooves muffled by the snow. The trail narrowed through a pass, and Jack kept to the front, leading them between granite outcroppings and low, wind-bent aspen. Once, a coyote crossed their path, silent and lean, its tracks vanishing behind them almost as fast as they were made. They stopped near midday where a spring still ran under a crust of ice. Savannah cupped water into her mouth, then leaned back on her heels, watching the trees. I used to think Montana would feel bigger, she said. Jack knelt beside the mare's leg, checking a stone bruise. It is. You just haven't seen the wild parts yet. She tilted her head. What would you call this then? Borderland. The parts where people still think they can tame it. Savannah stood, brushing snow from her skirts. And you don't believe that? I believe land and people can live alongside each other, but not one over the other. She looked at him, brow furrowed. You talk like you've tried both. He rose slowly, keeping his eyes on the horizon. I have. They carried on that afternoon until the snow thickened and the horses began to slip along the steeper climbs. Jack found a cut in the hillside where dense spruce formed a break from the wind. He unsaddled her horse first, let it beneath the cover, then returned for his own. As Savannah cleared space for the fire, she paused. You didn't say goodbye to anyone before this job, did you? He didn't look up. No one to say it to. No mother? No sister. Buried my ma when I was 16. My sister married a sawyer in Tennessee. Haven't seen her since Grant took Richmond. Savannah crouched, laying a flint strike to the kindling. You ever think about writing her? Thought about it 100 times. Never did. Why? Jack met her eyes fully. Because I didn't want her knowing the kind of man I turned into. Savannah sat back on her heels, hands blackened by soot. You think she wouldn't forgive you? I think she'd remember who I was, not who I became. The fire caught, casting gold light against the bark and snow. Jack took his coat off and laid it over a patch of bare ground, then handed her the tin of beans he'd warmed. She took it, blowing on the edge. You ever think about who you'd be if none of it had happened? He didn't answer for so long she thought he might not. Then he said, I'd have stayed near the river where we were raised. Built a house with my brother. Maybe carved a life out of the floodplain. And now? Jack looked at her, slow and careful. Now I think about carving something else. Something smaller. Maybe just a place beside the fire. She didn't speak. Just handed the tin back, her fingers brushing his. That night, they sat closer. The snow muffled every sound but the fire's pop and the slow breath of the horses behind them. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "You don't have to go to that ranch, Savannah." She didn't look away. "And where would I go instead?" He paused. "I've got land. Not much. A bend near the Judith River. Birch and low grass. I keep it quiet." Her eyes searched his. "You're offering me a place to stay." "I'm offering you the truth," he said, "which is more than what's waiting in Helena." Savannah stood, brushing snow from her skirts. "Don't ask me now. Let me think with the sun on my face." Jack nodded. "You'll have it." As she laid down that night, she didn't pull her blanket all the way closed. And when he lay beside her, neither spoke, but the space between them held something whole and unfinished, waiting for the trail to carry it forward. Use descriptions/reactions/topics. Jack's quiet promise to protect Savannah's physical soreness from travel, Jack's guarded nature and trauma from his past, Savannah's arranged marriage and sense of duty, Jack saving Savannah from two men, Savannah noticing Jack's protective behavior, Jack adjusting her tack without telling her, shared memories of lost family members, Jack's former life, working for men of questionable character, Savannah questioning her future with her betrothed. The changing land as they near Helena, Jack offering an alternate route to avoid danger, Jack's offer to take a lesser-known trail, Jack indirectly expressing he cares, Savannah realizing she has choices, Jack's sleeplessness and early fire-tending snowfall and its effect on their travels, Savannah's awareness of her shifting feelings, Jack's estranged family history, Jack offering Savannah a place on his land, Savannah asking for time before deciding. They reached the edge of the Gallatin Valley under a pale sky that promised more snow come nightfall. The wind had quieted, but the air held weight, and the horses moved slower than usual, their breath rising in soft clouds. The trail widened at a bend near a thicket of alder, and beyond it, a narrow footbridge crossed a stream half frozen at its edges. Jack pulled his horse to a stop and looked out across the valley. Another day, maybe less, and we'll reach the edge of town. Savannah studied the land below, where fences cut long lines across the snow-swept plain and smoke rose in thin columns from distant chimneys. "Do you know if he'll be there?" "The man. I can ask around before we ride in." Quietly. "No," she said. "I don't want to come in under silence. I want him to see me as I am. Not the girl he paid for." Jack nodded once and dismounted, unfastening his canteen. He let the silence hang between them until she stepped down without waiting for his hand. She crossed to the stream, crouched, and dipped her gloves in the water, letting them soak as the cold bit through the wool. She didn't flinch. Jack didn't move from where he stood. "You're not afraid of him?" "I was," she said. "But not anymore." He watched her wring out the water and press her gloves flat against a stone. "You've been quiet since the ridge." "I've been listening," she said. "To what?" She turned then, her face unreadable in the overcast light. "To myself. I used to be filled with other people's voices. My father, the pastor, the women who taught me how to walk and speak, and so. I thought that was all I had. And now I know I can climb a mountain trail in snow, load a rifle, hear a hawk before it crests the trees. That's not nothing." Jack stepped closer, the horses shifting behind him. "It's more than most." She looked toward the valley again. "I want to see him once. Look him in the eye. And then choose." Jack didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded and began leading the horses toward the bridge. They reached the edge of Helena just after noon the next day. A thin layer of snow clung to the rooftops and the main street was quiet, save for a few wagon wheels creaking past the storefronts. Savannah's hands were steady on the reins, her shoulders square. Jack rode beside her, his gaze scanning the buildings until they came to a wide porch with a painted sign that read Whitlow Ranch Holdings. A man in a dark coat stepped from the doorway, clean-shaven, tall, with a silver watch chain across his vest. He paused when he saw them, then smiled and stepped forward. "You must be Miss Pierce," he said. "I'm Henry Whitlow." Savannah dismounted without help. "I was told you'd meet me when I arrived." "I sent a man to fetch you," he said, glancing at Jack. "I trust he was paid in advance." "He did more than you asked," Savannah said. "He kept me alive." Whitlow's smile tightened. "Well, I suppose that's worth something." She stepped closer. Do you have a home here? Of course. You'll have your own room and a seamstress comes by twice a week. I've already arranged for. I didn't ask about the seamstress. He blinked. I beg your pardon? I asked if you have a home. Not a roof. Not a room. A home. Whitlow stiffened. I believe you misunderstand the arrangement. No, Savannah said. I understand it now more than ever. She turned, walked back to her horse, and swung into the saddle in one motion. Whitlow frowned. Is this some kind of dramatics? You'll be well kept. That's what you wanted. What I wanted, she said, voice calm, was a life. Jack hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. He met her eyes now. Come on, she said, and turned her mare away from the porch. They rode out of Helena without a word spoken between them. The sound of the town faded behind them, replaced by the soft crunch of hooves on snow. The trail east wound through low hills and open fields. Jack rode beside her, close enough that their knees brushed once on a narrow curve. At a break in the tree line, she pulled her horse to a stop. What now? He asked. She looked out across the open land. You said you had a place near the Judith. I do. Then take me there. His brow furrowed. You sure? I've never been more. Jack reached across the space between them and laid his hand over hers where it rested on the horn of her saddle. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But the weight of his hand, calloused and warm, said everything. They made it to the bend of the Judith River by the end of the week. The land was quiet there, the river slow and clear. Jack's cabin stood tucked into the trees, a single-room structure with a stone chimney and a porch that faced the sunrise. The fence was half-built, timber stacked in rows beside it. She helped finish it. She painted the window frames blue. He dug a second garden bed before the frost came. They filled the shelves with books and jars, dried meat wrapped in cloth, and pine cones that she collected from the ridge. He carved a small bench for the porch. She stitched curtains from an old feed sack and embroidered a pattern of wild geese on the edges. They never spoke of Helena again. The first time he kissed her was in the doorway, with snow falling behind her and the smell of smoke in her hair. His hands held her waist like a man anchoring himself to the shore. She didn't pull away. They married in spring, with the earth beginning to soften and the trees just starting to bud. A preacher came from Fort Benton, and the neighbor's wife brought fresh bread. There was no music, but Jack built her a swing behind the house, and they sat in it together that evening, her head on his shoulder, listening to the river. They grew older in the quiet way that people do when their hands are full of work and their hearts are full of each other. She taught the children at the mission how to read, and he built a bridge over the narrowest part of the river. Not many people called on them, but those who did stayed long and returned often. In time, the land changed again. More fences, more roads. But the cabin stayed, its windows blue, the porch swept clean each morning. And every night, as the fire died low, Jack would lay his hand over hers, just as he had that day outside Helena. And she would fall asleep knowing she had not been given a life, she had chosen one. Together.